next hour or so, we will hear from the winners of the 2021 IAEA International Essay Competition on Nuclear Law for students and early career professionals.
The winners will present to you their original essays on the topic Nuclear Law Today and Tomorrow. To present the award and say a few words, we now invite, on behalf of the Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi, Ms. Perilyn Johnson, the Director of Office of Legal Affairs, and the Legal Advisor to the DG. Please, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you, Ina and Chenchen. And as you all know, the Director General is in Ukraine. And so I'm really honored to speak for him at this legal brief. So today, I should say this evening really, we're recognizing the ingenuity and courage of not only the 5 winners, but of all the students and young career professionals that submitted their entries and dared to engage with such a complex field as nuclear law. We have received 64 submissions from 28 countries. The countries spanned from Azerbaijan, Botswana, Chile, Guatemala, Nigeria, Philippines, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Singapore, Turkey, UAE, and the US, just to name a few, and to show the global enthusiasm to the topic. The essays covered the hottest issues, the very same issues we are debating at our conference this week. From the 4 main branches of nuclear law, we all know them by heart now: safety, security, safeguards, and civil liability on nuclear damage. Some essays touch upon associated fields and consider the interplay between nuclear, environmental, and other fields of law, as well as the interaction of nuclear law with policy and communication issues, which, as you remember from the high-level opening Monday with DG Grossi, that was one of the themes, how we bring in the policy makers with the lawyers, and how communication and transparency is so important. What is particularly encouraging about this essay competition is that the submissions were split almost evenly between female and male contenders. And the gender issue also came up in the high-level opening. And so it's great to see that our young lawyers are already, we got parity. We have parity already with our young lawyers. And while we celebrate the ingenuity of the winners and learn from their insights, we would also like to celebrate the engagement of students and young professionals from around the world with this complex and important field. They are paying attention. The 5 winners were chosen through a rigorous and blind selection process. They will momentarily receive an IAEA award certificate and a cash prize of 2,000 euros, thanks to the generosity of our sponsor, Ambassador Xavier Sticker from the French Permanent Mission. Before turning over to Ambassador Sticker for his brief remarks, I would like to acknowledge Sean Ching Rui Chua from Singapore. Sean is unfortunately unable to join us today, but he's also receiving a prize for his essay, which was entitled Greater Environmental Accountability in Global Nuclear Liability Regime. Congratulations to all the winners on behalf of the Director General. Thank you.
To present the cash prize of 2,000 euros, we would invite our generous sponsor, Ambassador Xavier Sticker, of the French permanent mission, you have the floor.
Just a few brief remarks. First, to express deep gratitude, and I think that on this I can be the interpret of the room, to IAEA for convening this conference on nuclear law. I have to say that in 2 years' time, I haven't witnessed here in this building an event that is that lively, that energetic, that stimulating, and that reminds us of how life was before, but with an addition, which is that this atmosphere and this substance can also be shared with those who, in numbers, follow this conference remotely from afar. And many thanks for that to the agency, to the Office of Legal Affairs, and to Director Perry Johnson for this initiative, this work, and for creating this dynamic. Second, it's also with great interest and with our support that this competition was launched for young lawyers to submit essays and to illustrate through their work how vivid this community dedicated to nuclear energy and nuclear technologies and application is. I reviewed all the essays, and I'm aware how difficult it has been out of those 64 contributions to single out only 5 of them. I read them, and actually, of course, young lawyers on nuclear law, they are the new generation, and they embody the future of our community. But they embody also the future on the basis of the themes that they have chosen. And I was struck to see how the environment, climate change, the sea and the protection of the sea came up systematically, and space on the topics that they have picked and that they have worked on in words that I found both substantial and eloquent. Third and lastly, my country, through the French Atomic Energy Commission, has been very happy and is very happy to contribute financially to these awards, and to, through that, and on the basis of IAEA's selection, to encourage further work in this area by new generations. And the Director General highlighted yesterday how important it is to structure the activities through legal frameworks, and by filling gaps and identifying emerging topics in view of closing those gaps and making sure that we have an adaptative framework. So we hope and trust that such awards and this initiative by IAEA works against that objective, and ensure that in future we keep that required adaptation. Thank you very much, and I will leave space for the...
Please stay on the stage, Ambassador.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ms. Carolyn Johnson, would you join us? And now we will invite, please, if you can
Go to the center, okay.
And now we will invite the lucky winners one by one to come and join us on the stage to get their certificates and their prizes. The first one is Murat Cengizlier. Is receiving an award for his essay licensing SMRs worldwide, a game changer for climate action. Please, Murat.
Murat, congratulations. And I think, Murat, you stay on the stage. I think you stay on the stage. Maybe you can go on track.
Thank you, Murat. So next one is Nataliia. Aksenova is awarded for contribution entitled Trends in Improving Legislation in the Transboundary Movement of Floating Nuclear Power Plants. Nataliia.
Serious topic. Congratulations.
Lina Raxter is receiving an award for her essay, A Dormant Solution, the consequence for nuclear security of failing to implement the 2005 amendments to the Convention for the Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against the Safety of Maritime Navigation. Please. You thought I was going to say CPPNM. Fooled you this time.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Lina. So the last one, Alexander Gilbert is awarded for his essay, Space, the Final Frontier of International Nuclear Law. Alexander.
And one more time, if we can remind you all about Chenchen, who has also received his essay but was not able to join us today. So, but for now, if we could all just take a group photo with our winners. And
how do you want us to do the photo? Maybe I go on the either end. You on one end and me on the other end? So with students go in the middle and I'll go on the other. Yeah, this is perfect. Yeah, please. Impressed. I'm so impressed. Serious topics, very serious topics.
Thank you, Director Johnson. Thank you, Ambassador Sticker. If we can now ask you to join us in the audience, and we will proceed to the talks.
Thank you.
This way.
And now we begin the fun things. Not that this wasn't fun for all of us. But it's not only winners that get to have all the entertainment. If you can please follow the instructions and either scan the code or on your phone, go to menti.com and then enter the code, please.
And we're going to have a little poll today. And I mean, not just for the ones joining us here in the premises, but also the ones joined remotely. So if you can insert this mentimeter.com and with the code or scan that code, we will start with some easy questions. Maybe we go back to the code first. 68804066. Everybody's got it? Okay, good. I think we're good to go.
So now you know the first question. Where are you from? Excellent. We have some diversity in the house. we'll give it a few more seconds. Fantastic. It's really, truly a global debate. Now,
let's move to the second question.
Second question, please.
Oh, what is your professional affiliation?
And we will forgive you if you're not a lawyer, although begrudgingly.
Oh, I think we have some choices now. Yeah, I mean, most of the lawyers, I'm not surprised. But we have academics, diplomats, engineers, scientists. I'm not surprised as well.
Who are the others in the audience? Anybody here? Claimed an other? Brave enough to tell us?
Oh.
Thank you, Carolyn. Appreciate that. All right, and the next few questions are a little tougher. Which international convention in the field of nuclear law is most important?
Do you actually have an important one?
Do you have a less important one?
Okay.
Nice.
All of them, yeah, I think so. Keep coming.
NPT seems to dominate. All of them, indeed.
It's keep coming, I know, but we have to move to the next question now. Let's move to the next question. Okay, this is a longer one. Do you think the current legal framework is robust and agile enough to meet the ever-changing landscape of technology, opportunities, and challenges? Okay, we have the answers already. Okay.
Not very optimistic ones.
Okay. I think they're kind of a little bit battle there, but...
All right, well, those of you that are saying no, you'll be on the spot in about a second.
I think we got, they're still changing. But I mean, I think we got the winners anyway.
I wouldn't call it quite that way, but. So, how do you think the current legal framework should be strengthened? That's a quick on the answers now, huh?
It's an open question?
It is an open question.
Oh, it's an open question. Really nothing? Oh, yes, okay.
Harmonization, excellent.
Aligned to other fields. Academically, more sanctions.
Suspended. What exactly are we suspending?
Look like we have a lot of interesting answers to that.
Harmonization.
I think that dominates, yeah.
Cooperation, thank you for that one. That's our bread and butter. All right, now that we have our homework cut out for us when it comes to strengthening the legal framework, we will reward you all with a little something. So if we could please ask you all to reach under your seats for a little surprise.
Look carefully and the right spot, you'll get it.
It is not a 2,000 euro check.
Yeah, definitely not.
Sorry about that.
Okay, I think you all find chocolates there where we hidden before. Congratulations to all. Look like we got some
we do have
ones.
a full house, so I do hope we have enough chocolate. Matthias, we have enough chocolate? Yeah? Okay. If we don't, that's the guy that you wanna take out after this?
Okay, I think everyone got their chocolates. While you are re-energizing this delicious chocolate, I mean, Matthias, could you give Caroline another one?
I think we need
Ever
some
special.
Extras.
Yeah. So while you are re-energizing with the chocolates now, with delicious chocolates, because the law is always more fun when there are chocolates involved.
Everything is more fun when there's chocolate
Definitely.
involved.
And now we would invite you to enjoy a special musical performance.
So we invite to the stage Ms. Marie Speyman and Ms. Christian Bakanik for a little performance. Marie, Christian, thank you. This was an original composition, right?
Yes.
Excellent, and I've certainly never heard an accordion and a cello before, so thank you for this. And Marie Speyman and Christian Bakanic, please. So, and now off to the talks. Are you all ready? Good answer. A little louder, please. A little louder. Excellent. I don't actually really need a mic. I can be very loud. Harry knows this. So for most of us, when we hear the word nuclear, the first thing that pops into our minds?
Probably energy, but also weapons or accidents.
For how many of you did the word law appear in your minds? Be honest now, raise your hands. No one, not even the lawyers. We got some good representation of lawyers, not even for the lawyers. All right.
Yet, nuclear law is essential for realizing the benefits of nuclear science and technology.
Nuclear law is a highly specialized body of law that permeates the entire nuclear sector. A basic feature of this specialized body of law is its focus on benefits and risks.
For example, nuclear law provides basis for the safe and secure handling of all kinds of radiation sources to protect medical or industrial workers from overexposure to radiation.
Nuclear law provides for the physical protection regime of nuclear material in usage, transit, and/or storage, and ensures the criminalization of offenses associated with unauthorized use or sabotage of nuclear material and facilities.
And also, in case of a nuclear incident or radiological emergency, nuclear law also establishes channels for notification, assistance, and cooperation among countries, and also a compensation regime for those who might be impacted.
Nuclear law provides for accounting and control of all nuclear material in peaceful nuclear activities to prevent its diversion to nuclear weapons.
Indeed. Nuclear law is the very foundation that enables safe, secure, and peaceful uses of nuclear technology.
Like all law, nuclear law is living, breathing, and evolving.
Thus far, it has been largely reactive in its character, and many international conventions came into being following such catastrophic events, such as Chernobyl or even the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
However, nuclear industry, just like the IAEA, does not stand still for a single minute.
Has the nuclear law evolved in steps with the nuclear industry and all the emerging applications and technologies?
How should we, the IAEA, and the international community at large, move this field forward to continue making sure that nuclear science and technology has the legal framework that minimizes the risks and maximizes the benefits?
And how do we enable further progress and contribute to the maintenance of international peace and security through the implementation of safeguards agreements?
These are the very questions that the winners of our essay competition have grappled with. And these are the very questions that all of us are grappling here at the IAEA First International Conference on Nuclear Law, the Global Debate.
And also, these are the same questions we contend with here in Vienna on a daily basis, and our member states deal with in their capitals.
And on to the talks. So, the first lucky, in his essay, Murat Cengizlier took on one of the hottest topics in the current debate, licensing of small modular reactors. Please, Murat, share with us your insights and recommendations.
Welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a delight to be here. I will guide you through the licensing of the small modular reactors today. But before doing so, I would like to explain the reason of why I chose to talk about this topic. And my reason can be summarized in 2 words: climate change. Most of us know now that climate change is a scientific truth that will negatively affect the lives of billions if we do not take swift action. The energy sector, through the combustion of fossil fuels, contributes tremendously to the advancement of climate change. And we need to stop it for good. One of the options that we can pick up is expanding our agenda for established renewable energy sources, such as solar panels or wind turbines. However, the numbers have shown that these technologies, which are non-storable, are not enough to supply the current demand of the world. And this is precisely where nuclear comes in. Over the years, nuclear technology related to energy production has proven to be safe, secure, and clean thanks to the robust international legal framework of the Conventions on Nuclear Safety, Security, Safeguards, and Liability on Nuclear Damage, and also through the international safety standards and guidelines, which have ensured the effective implementation of these international standards by national authorities while keeping up with the latest technology. One of the advanced reactors called Small Modular Reactors, or SMRs in short, are the stars of this energy production. I could state a few reasons here. First, SMRs are designed from the ground up for commercial use. They ship to the point of use, and they replicate a nuclear steam supply system in a small factory environment. Their attachable and detachable modules allow for responding to energy demand fluctuations in different geographies and depending on different seasons. But perhaps most important, nuclear SMRs allow for the safe, secure, clean, and affordable power. But how ready are our national legal institutions in implementing SMRs? What are the key steps to ensure that the implementation of SMRs can be done to the energy mix of different member states? Who are the key stakeholders who should be involved in the discussions? I'm going to try to tackle those issues under 2 different perspectives: regulatory licensing and intellectual property licensing. From a regulatory point of view, the nuclear supply system is licensed for the design, the construction, and the operation of a nuclear installation. This is what licensing means in terms of regulatory work. Researchers have pointed out that licensability is key for reaching technological readiness levels for any type of new technology, such as SMRs. What does this entail? National regulatory authorities should enable an effective licensing for the design, the construction, and the operation of SMRs, just like nuclear power plants. However, we are facing a problem here, because there is no current harmonization in the licensing process of nuclear power plants. What do I mean by this? States are currently free to choose whether they can request or require one or multiple licenses for the different steps of design, construction, and operation of nuclear power plants. And this might be the same case for SMRs. This creates a problem because multiple steps often require multiple authorizations, duplicate steps, and this can make us lose the precious time we have against climate change. On the other hand, international collaboration could mean, for example, the establishment of joint technical reviews for the streamlining of the licensing process for all design, construction, and operation. This has already started in between countries, such as between the US and Canada. However, what I'm thinking is something of a larger scope. What I'm suggesting is the creation of a national, multinational advisory panel that could streamline the process of licensing for SMRs. This has already proven to be effective in the domain of the transportation of radioactive material, where the safety standards that were established by the IAEA were underpinned by the UN Social and Economic Council, which further allowed for the adaptation, the national adaptation of these measures worldwide, and those specific measures became binding international law right now. Another support could come from a binding legal instrument, which could allocate an advisory role to SMR designers, together with the operators, in streamlining their designs worldwide. In this case, both designers and operators could have shared responsibility in terms of liability for nuclear damage. People who are familiar with aviation regulations, especially the Chicago Convention, would know where I am coming from. The aviation regulations were streamlined thanks to the adoption of airworthiness rules for the creation of aircrafts, and designers were given this specific role and shared responsibility with the operators for a uniformized system in aviation law. So this is my first point. But licensing also refers to a transfer of the rights of use of an intellectual property. And in the case of inventions, we could talk about patents. Now, you might be thinking, wait, nuclear technology does not apply for patents because most governments and regulatory authorities are aware that submitting patents could disclose the sensitive information about the design of a nuclear power plant. However, the world is changing. The world is seeing a race of patentabilities of the SMRs, and this is the same case for all different types of SMRs. Many countries are already in the race of submitting their patents for SMRs. So what does this mean? And why is this so important? Because a patented product cannot be used or replicated or exported to another country without the authorization of the patent holder. This could create a barrier for developing countries to have access to such new technology. And this is where compulsory licensing comes in. Compulsory licensing refers to the authorization of a use of rights of an intellectual property without the authorization of the patent holder in exceptional cases. And one of these exceptional cases is public interest. What do I mean by this public interest? Climate change negotiators have long argued that technologies which help combat against the advancement of climate change are at the heart of such public interest. And therefore, all environmentally sound technologies should be subject to compulsory licensing. But what are those environmentally sound technologies? Can SMRs, for instance, be environmentally sound technologies? This is mostly a policy decision that will be taken by different stakeholders, including regulators, policymakers, and the industry, but also by the public, through informed decision-making. I am calling here member states to inform their regulatory authorities and their national institutions of the capabilities of SMRs and how they can provide a safe and clean energy so that the stakeholders who are involved in the decision-making could make an informed decision about how to qualify those SMRs. To sum up, SMRs have the potential to really turn the tides against climate change. And this is something that we should really consider. We should give it an opportunity to rise. Many regulatory authorities can develop a multinational advisory panel who would design a streamlined approach in the licensing of these SMRs, while also having a binding international instrument that could allocate responsibility to the designer of SMRs for streamlining the entire process. Another help could come with the qualification of these SMRs as environmentally sound technologies, which would go even further beyond the realm of intellectual property and would allow SMRs to be perceived as safe and secure energy sources. I'm hoping that in the near future, SMRs will contribute as a real game changer to climate change. Thank you so much for your attention.
Murat, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
If I can put you on the hot spot, and literally it is a hot spot in all these lights, how do you reconcile your suggestion with the diversity of regulatory cultures around the world?
Great question, Ina. I think throughout this entire panels and discussions that have been going through in the global debate, we emphasized on the importance of communication. And this communication should go both ways, meaning that experts in nuclear law, in nuclear technology, and experts in communication should collaborate together to inform the relevant stakeholders, the public, and the industry of the capabilities, while also receiving feedback from those industries and to be able to respond to those feedbacks. And as you said, this is a complex environment, and we are talking about a heavily regulated field. But the same challenges were faced in different industries that I have mentioned, including the international transport of radioactive material and also the aviation industry. And we saw that through tools such as advisory panels and international law, we were able to overcome those differences and contribute for the greater good. And I believe that for the case of SMRs, we will be able to contribute for combating against climate change through communication.
I love the optimism. Thank you, Murat. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
As Murat's essay demonstrates, the issue of licensing advanced reactor technologies is difficult enough with the answers we got as well when talking about their deployment on just land. Imagine, as will be demonstrated by Nataliia Aksenova, it becomes even more complicated when we talk about such reactors floating. In her essays, Nataliia explores what should be done to strengthen legal frameworks for floating nuclear power plants. Nataliia, the floor is yours.
I'm going to be talking to you about the trends in improving legislation in the transboundary movement of floating nuclear power plants. Imagine that someday you put your phone on charge and the electricity comes from the nuclear reactor in your garage. In fact, you picked it from the electronics store outlet in your city, or it was brought by a courier. Now imagine a factory where on an assembly line, instead of TVs or laptops, reactor models are produced in mass production. Further, imagine that such installation can be delivered to the remote places in the north, and they can hit the polar stations where scientists observe polar bears. Immediately, we have chills from the thought that there is a nuclear reactor somewhere nearby, haven't we? In fact, there are currently about 70 projects of small modular reactors in the world, some of which will be produced in industrial scale in coming decades. The creation of new nuclear facilities often leads to a gap in legal regulation. This is a very exciting topic for research. For this reason, I became involved in international law community, and last year I graduated from the School of Nuclear Law of the Nuclear Energy Agency. I'm interested how to create safe and mobile energy, as well as covering this with legal framework. The global community can now choose the most suitable small modular reactors that can be mass-produced in the future. It is also necessary to create simplified technical standards and licensing systems, as well as to adapt legislation to these new energy sources. What about the advantages? And why are small modular reactors the thing of the future? The main factor for small reactors is safety, cheapness, speed of construction, the ability to freely move, and add models if necessary. They can be used in remote off-grid locations and could provide an excellent complementary source of power to variable renewable energy. It can inspire non-nuclear countries to use this type of energy as part of their decarbonization program. This is particularly valuable as countries slash their carbon emissions to meet global climate change targets. And today, I would like to talk about one of the type of small modular reactors, floating nuclear power plants. The first one has been in operation in Chukotka since 2019, is academic Lomonosov. Chukotka is a territory in the far north beyond the Arctic Circle, where winter lasts about 10 months. And for this reason, there is an ongoing need for energy for daily living. There it solves two problems. Firstly, this is a replacement of retired capacities of old thermal and nuclear power plants, which has been operating since the end of the 20th century. Secondly, it provides energy to the main mining companies, including gold mining sites and projects related to the development of the ozone. In 2019, when I first learned about the floating NPP, I was in Iran on construction of full-scale NPP. And I was amazed at the sheer size of the NPP project. I thought about this concept, where a small NPP is put on a ship. And as a lawyer, I could not stop thinking on how this issue of legal regulation was resolved. And this thought haunted me. And as soon as I returned to St. Petersburg, I started an international law master's program and conducted research on this topic. I would love to share the results of my research with you. Firstly, let's take a closer look at the floating NPP. It consists of two parts. A barge, it means non-self-propelled vessels, and with a small nuclear small nuclear power plant on it. Inside this construction, there is its heart, a nuclear reactor. Such floating NPPs is able to provide electricity to a town with a population of about 100,000 people. Next, consider the benefits of floating NPP. Floating NPPs have many commercial and logistical advantages over normal NPPs. Such nuclear power plants should be built near the coast, closer to their users, especially bearing in mind the fact that about 50% of Earth's population lives within 100 kilometers in ocean or sea coast. Also, there are no problems with the delivery of nuclear fuel, spent fuel, and radioactive waste management. The floating NPP can also achieve an unprecedented level of safety and physical protection by minimizing the hazards from the extreme natural events, especially earthquakes. Because the power plant is located on the water, there is less risk of land contamination and public exposure from the severe accidents. And now, I would like to turn your attention to some of the difficulties scientists are to face. If the floating NPP is not a full-scale NPP and not a nuclear icebreaker, what is it? If we have regulation for nuclear icebreakers, why can't this be applied to floating NPP? What do international conventions say about such ships? Start with first question and determine the difference between a nuclear icebreaker and floating NPP. Both nuclear-powered ships and floating NPPs have a nuclear reactor. The difference between them is that the former moves with help of nuclear energy, and the latter produces nuclear energy, which is then transported to the onshore networks. Also, due to its stationary nature, a floating NPP doesn't have to be refueled more often than once in 10 years. Furthermore, a floating NPP can generate not only electrical, but also thermal energy for nearby locations. And the next question, how can we overcome gaps in legal regulation of floating NPPs? Scientists came to the conclusion that if we are talking about the movement of such units in the territorial waters of the state, that is domestic delivery. Then there are no legal difficulties if the state has acceded to the main nuclear conventions, because the general regulatory framework is applicable as to ordinary civil ships and separate rules relating to ships with nuclear installations. But what about the transborder movement of floating NPP? There are legal gray zones in the law of the sea with respect to floating NPPs. The fact is that potential customers can be developing countries that are not parties to the main conventions, nuclear conventions. And the truth is that we don't know how to transport such ships in the high seas. If it is not a normal ship, even with nuclear material on the boat, provided for by the Maritime Convention. There are also gaps in the application of International Convention on Civil Liability for nuclear damage in the event of a nuclear accident. It is crucially important to take into account the issue of who owns the floating NPPs, who is responsible for delivery to the location and subsequent maintenance, including refueling and radioactive waste management. Possible legal problems can be overcome through the conclusion on intergovernmental agreements before the start of construction between the host and supplies country and the transit states if necessary. So, I believe it's absolutely necessary to develop a model agreement on floating nuclear plants, which will allow to resolve the legal gaps. In particular, it is proposed to include the following main sections: rights and obligations of state parties, including the question, who is operator? It is very important questions if we say about nuclear liability. Who is responsible for reloading of nuclear fuel and fuel waste? Who is responsible for decommissioning? Import and export controls issues, including participation of the transit states, provision of nuclear and physical safety, financial guarantees, including nuclear risk insurance. Let me recap the key of my talk. Firstly, small modular reactors will become a common energy source in the future. Secondly, floating NPP, one kind of small modular reactor, is a good solution for remote off-grid locations and non-nuclear countries. Lastly, most important is the model agreement developed by experts in nuclear law and should be recommended for conclusion between the host supplier country and the transit states, which will allow to overcome existing legal gaps. Thank you for your attention.
I'm gonna keep you still here a longer while for the stage. Thank you for your excellent presentation. I think so does our audience very appreciate what you did just now. To put on your hotspot as well as Murat. Currently, the floating power unit is licensed and under oversight of the national regulatory authorities. And also, it has been transported and it's operated within the national jurisdiction. And during your presentation, you talk about your concerns and those issues you brought about. As with SMRs, and especially floating reactors, it is likely that such technology would be deployed across borders, as we can expect it. Yeah. What international instruments would apply for the floating reactors, and would additional amendments to the existing instruments be necessary, or perhaps wholly new instruments from your point of view?
Thank you for the question. As I said earlier, I think it's a good decision is to develop the model agreement, which can be recommended to host a supplier country and transit states if it's necessary. I think that it can be in a form like other intergovernmental agreements for construction full-scale NPP. Mm-hmm. And also, I have an idea that next instrument which can be used may be additional protocol to existing nuclear conventions, and not only nuclear conventions, mm-hmm. Where we are finding gaps in legal regulations of such installations. For example, Maritime Convention or Convention on Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage, where now such installations are not regulated in full form.
Yeah, sure. Okay, excellent answer enough, I think.
Thank you,
Nataliia.
Thank you.
And while we are continuing to think about the legal challenges of advanced reactor technologies, we invite you all to enjoy one more musical performance from Marie and Christian. If the music moves you, I would also invite you to start dancing. I was dancing a little bit to the side, and I saw some of you, Professor, you were tapping your fingers over there. I see you trying to escape. I know there's no more chocolate, but you have to stay.
The metamorphosis, keeping you closely informed about the goddess Europa. Carried off by Zeus the bull, brought to Greece a spear to rule, the fatherly worries never washed away. She's been ruling ever since, doesn't care who fights and wins, and if you listen closely, you'll hear her say, it's the metamorphosis, keeping you closely informed about Europa. Carried off by Zeus the bull, brought to Greece a spear to rule, the fatherly worries never washed away. She's been ruling ever since, but doesn't care who fights and wins, and if you listen closely, you'll hear her say, Europe, listen up, you need a love that already knows. But the heart's not It's our speed hypnosis making sure all we do stays unfulfilling. Once we find a slower groove, mindfully we read the news. Translucent puppet show is on display. So lazy I obey. Yeah, lazy I obey. She said a love that already knows. But the heart is not singing yet. But the heart
That was fantastic, thank you. So, and now we're floating along to the next topic. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Lina Raxter on a topic who's going to talk to us on a topic that is very dear to my heart, and I know a couple of other folks here in the audience, nuclear security. I know we can't have a favorite in nuclear law, but it's certainly my favorite. And the other interesting connection is that Lina is a law student at my law school in American University, Washington College of Law. So Lina, please, we invite you to talk to us about your essay on the suppression of unlawful acts against safety of maritime navigation.
Please join us.
An estimated 90% of world trade is conducted by sea. Consequently, a maritime terrorist attack, especially one on vulnerable and strategic sea routes, would be devastating to the global economy. Now, this is not a hypothetical threat. In fact, major terrorist attacks have prompted the international community to respond previously. In 1985, terrorists hijacked the Italian cruise ship Achille Lauro and killed 1 passenger. In response to this attack, the International Maritime Organization conducted a review of the maritime safety architecture and discovered that, in fact, there were no specific rules on maritime terrorism, because unlike piracy, maritime terrorism had never previously been an issue. Consequently, the international community created the 1988 Convention for the Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against the Safety of Maritime Navigation. 15 years later, after the September 11th attacks, the international community realized that the 1988 convention was not sufficient because it focused too significantly on responding to terrorist attacks rather than preventing them. This was insufficient to protect ships, their cargo, their crew, and their passengers from the emerging threats that terrorist groups posed. Consequently, the international community created the 2005 amendments to the original convention. Together, the amendments and the convention form a comprehensive regime that both responds and prevents terrorist acts. However, even though both the amendments and the convention were created in response to major terrorist incidents, the amendments maintain significantly less support than the original convention. So what do the amendments add to the regime? Most crucially, the amendments create a regime that addresses the threat of biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons in two ways: by prohibiting the use of these weapons on or against a ship, and by prohibiting the transport of these weapons, any explosive or radioactive material, any source material, special fissionable material, and any equipment, materials, software, or technology that significantly contributes to the design, manufacture, and delivery of biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons. Further, these amendments prohibit the discharge of any of the above substances, as well as any oil, liquefied natural gas, or other hazardous or noxious materials. Lastly, the amendments prohibit individuals from threatening to commit any of the above offenses or from knowingly transporting an individual who has committed these offenses. But here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. One of the fundamental rules of international law is that treaties and agreements are only binding to states that consent to be bound. Further, when a treaty or agreement is amended, unless explicitly stated otherwise, the amendments are not immediately binding on those original states' parties. Now, as I noted earlier, even though the 2005 amendments have been open for adoption for 15 years, there is still a significant lack of support for the amendments. As of October 2021, the original convention maintains 166 states parties, which represent 95% of the gross tonnage of the world's merchant fleet. Now, in comparison, the amendments maintain 52 states parties, which represent a mere 40% of the gross tonnage of the world's merchant fleet. Further, of those 52 states parties, 2 key states are missing: Indonesia and Malaysia, which both border the Strait of Malacca, a shipping channel that handles 1/3 of the world's global trade. Consequently, the lack of support for the amendments means the key provisions I mentioned earlier do not apply to the vast majority of ships that participate in global commerce. Thus, the international community does not benefit from the comprehensive regime that the amendments and the convention create together, leaving the world critically exposed to serious threats. Now, given the importance of the amendments, we have to ask, why do they maintain such little support? Academics have been discussing this for many years, but in the interest of time, I will address 2 of the most common concerns by states. First, states claim that there is an overly broad definition of dual use in the amendments. And second, states claim that the inconsistent nature of the amendments justifies their lack of support. As to the first reason, in the context of biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons, dual-use materials are those that can be used for civilian and non-nuclear purposes, as well as for the design, fabrication, testing, and production of weaponized biological, chemical, and nuclear material. And as I noted earlier, the amendments prohibit the transport of these materials. However, this definition is very broad. For example, computers could fall into the description because they are vital for the design of nuclear weapons. But at the same time, computers are central to our modern internet era. Thus, some states claim that transport of items critical to normal life would be prohibited by the amendments. In fact, this concern was so great that the drafting committee only agreed to this wording by a majority rather than unanimously. However, this concern does not actually affect the implementation of the 2005 amendments. Treaties do not function in a vacuum. They are applied in conjunction with multilateral and bilateral agreements between states, as well as other international materials. Therefore, in practice, dual-use materials that apply under the amendments would depend on 3 factors. First, other international agreements. Second, the facts of the situation. And third, the intent of the specific individual in transporting the specific material. Consequently, the states should not use this as a justification for their lack of support for the amendments. Now, as to the second reason, while many have praised the amendments for creating a tighter, more integrated legal structure to counter maritime terrorism, many others have criticized them for being overly burdened with verbiage and minor inconsistencies. However, it's important to keep in mind that this agreement was negotiated by 2 large multilateral forums, the International Maritime Organization and the United Nations General Assembly. The final text is a long, overarching document that reflects extensive compromises between multiple parties. Therefore, it is not surprising that it includes verbiage and inconsistencies. In fact, many international agreements have this exact same issue. It's so common that there is a long-standing, well-established procedure in international law to interpret international agreements, called the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. Article 31 of the Vienna Convention mandates that international agreements must first be interpreted based on their ordinary meaning in light of the object and purpose of the agreement. If this is insufficient, an interpreter may then resort to the treaty's context, any relevant agreements or instruments existing at the time of its creation, and any subsequent agreements, state practice, or other relevant rules of international law. Now, if there's still an absurd result or inconsistency after applying this article, Article 32 of the Vienna Convention allows the interpreter to refer to materials created when drafting the agreement to determine the intent of the drafters. As such, a concern about inconsistencies does not actually affect the application of the amendments and should not be used by states to justify their lack of support. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me just leave you with one final thought. To be properly protected, states must be party to both the amendments and the convention. Therefore, because the amendments maintain a significant lack of support as compared to the convention, the international community as a whole cannot benefit from the maritime security framework created by these convention and amendments. The end result is this. The failure to adopt the amendment leaves the world dangerously exposed to the exact threats that first prompted the creation of this maritime safety regime. Thank you.
Alina, thank you for your presentation. You're right, nuclear treaties do not, or treaties in general, do not operate in a vacuum, so thank you for making us think about this particular, or nuclear law in context of other areas of law, in this case maritime law. So a question for you, you're on the hot spot, whether you like it or not. So SUA is not under our auspices as the agency, but the CPPNM and its 2005 amendment is. How do you see those two relating to each other?
So this actually gets to a point that I was referring to in my speech.
For both the dual-use materials and the inconsistencies, agreements, such as the one you mentioned, assist the international community in interpreting the meanings of the 2005 SUA amendments as well as the convention. Therefore, it's incredibly important for any rulemaker to bear in mind that these agreements work together to form the ultimate regime that the world uses. And we must always keep every area of law in mind when we're looking at how to respond to threats.
Thank you, Lena. That was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
And finally, we are going to talk about something very interesting. As you can see from the program, this is not spoiler alert because we're going to have a technical session also on this topic as well on Friday. I'm not saying this not because I'm the technical officer of that panel. So we're having SMRs. We're having the floating reactor as one of the special type. We have security. And the next one, finally, we're going to have Alex Gilbert take us to the final frontier, which is also the technical session, the topic as well, in this presentation on the application of international nuclear law in the context of global space rush. Alex?
Humanity is on the verge of a new space age. New technologies and falling costs are expanding space access. Many countries are developing space programs for the first time, including emerging economies. Private companies are developing applications that sound like science fiction. Satellite constellations, space tourism, asteroid mining. We are looking at a new age of space commercialization. In the next decade, more than 100 missions are planned to the surface of the moon, more than in all of human history. Most of them are commercial. We are talking about an economic possibility of trillions of dollars in the next several decades, tens of millions of jobs. We will be able to develop new technologies to better understand climate change and to help mitigate it by reducing carbon emissions. Nuclear energy is well suited to power this new space age. Its characteristics make it an ideal energy source in outer space. It is energy dense, allowing the mass of a spacecraft to stay low. It is reliable, able to operate anywhere in the solar system. It is resilient, able to handle the harsh environmental conditions of outer space. Things like vacuum, microgravity, or extreme temperatures. And space radiation, it's not a big deal for a reactor. When we look at space nuclear energy, there are three types that we can possibly use. First, we have radioisotope power sources, historically the foundation of space nuclear energy. By harnessing small amounts of energy and heat from the decay of certain radioisotopes, we can power spacecraft reliably for decades. In fact, the most important space missions in history have been powered by radioisotopes. The Apollo, Lunokhod, and Chang'e missions to the moon. The Voyager missions that showed us Saturn, Jupiter, and the ice giants for the first time. The Mars rovers that right now are searching the surface of Mars for life. The second type of space nuclear energy is fission. We are developing fission reactors that will enable high energy applications in outer space. Things like stations on the surface of the moon or Mars. We'll be able to do things like space mining, things that really unlock a space industry. And space reactors can directly propel a spacecraft as a nuclear rocket or through an ion engine, providing many times the power of a traditional chemical engine. The third type of power is fusion propulsion. Because of how fusion works, we actually might see a fusion rocket before we see a commercial fusion power plant. It can provide even more power than a fission rocket. This means that when astronauts, taikonauts, and cosmonauts go to Mars, it will be on an atomic rocket. But we're not just talking about technological innovation. We're talking about business model innovation. We're talking about a new industry. The team that I am on, Xeno Power, is just such a company, and I'm leading regulatory work to navigate novel pathways right now. Many terrestrial reactor companies, whose names you know, are developing space reactors. So when we're talking about these new uses of the atom, exotic environments, and private companies, you must be wondering, how is all this governed? Space nuclear systems exist at the intersection of space law and nuclear law. This audience may be unfamiliar with space law. The foundation is the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. It extends the international system into outer space by declaring an area beyond national jurisdiction. Nations and peoples are free to access and use space. State obligations that exist on Earth, like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, are the same in space. This system, however, is still in its early stages. There's only a limited amount of soft law. We have some burgeoning industry standards and norms, but we do not have something like the IAEA. And when we're talking about nuclear systems, there's a gap. Compared to space law, nuclear law is relatively well developed. We have hundreds of treaties, multilateral and bilateral. We have very strong soft law, strong industry norms and standards. We have the IAEA. But this system was designed around terrestrial reactors. So there's again a regulatory gap in how it addresses space reactors. At the intersection of space law and nuclear law, we have a very limited amount of space and nuclear law. There are no hard law provisions. There's no treaties. We do not have established industry norms and standards. There's no space nuclear IAEA. We do have soft law instruments, and they provide an initial start, but it's really just a start. The UN passed principles for governing space nuclear power sources in 1992. That, however, was meant to govern the conduct of the Cold War, not a modern commercial industry. The IAEA, with the rest of the United Nations, developed a safety framework in 2009, and it provides an excellent first step, but more is needed, especially when it comes to implementation. We must reconcile space law and nuclear law. How do we do that? In my essay, and as part of my doctoral studies, I'm trying to answer that question right now. When I look specifically at nuclear law, I see the 4 pillars, and I believe that that is a good framework to start looking at these issues. You do need some work, but the liability and non-proliferation pillars can be addressed relatively easily. Safety and security, on the other hand, have more challenges because the unique nature of environmental conditions in outer space, things like orbital speeds, very fragile planetary environments, and the nature of space nuclear technologies are things that we've not prepared for before. There are new safety concerns and security things that we will need to address to unlock this new industry. I want to talk today specifically about safety. Safety is the foundation of both the aerospace and nuclear industries. It's something that we both value. When we are looking to develop a safety system and a framework for space nuclear, we can borrow from both. There are 3 elements that are important to enable future missions. First is launch safety. To send a nuclear system into outer space, you need to put it on a rocket. A rocket is a controlled explosion. Normally, when you're in the nuclear field, the word explosion is bad. We will be able to use aerospace tools to figure out how to do that safely. And in fact, we are beginning to. In the United States, we developed an initial regulatory framework to use aerospace tools like performance-based regulation, probabilistic risk analysis, things that the nuclear industry is just starting to fully grasp in terms of regulatory frameworks to guide safe launches of space nuclear systems. Now, this system is new. We still must implement it and find out whether there's any issues, find out how we can best improve it, and expand that system globally. But of the 3 issues, I think that one is the easiest to solve. The second area, however, is space operations. In 1978, a Soviet space reactor suffered a critical failure. It ended up crashing in Canada, creating a potentially major safety risk before it was found and cleaned up. When we look at the novel nature of space activities now, many activities in orbit, many more satellites that are congesting space traffic, applications on the moon, a very fragile environment, we need industry norms and standards and soft law guidance to help shape operations, to give mission planners the tools they need to understand the regulatory limitations. That's something that we're starting to work on now, but we do need more work. Number 3 is end of life. Just like on Earth, End of life is a major challenge for space nuclear systems. We have to handle decommissioning for reactors and spent fuel storage for both reactors and radioisotopes. In some cases, that might seem straightforward. We can just do it, quote unquote, in situ, in place. But when we look at fragile environments like the moon, using it as a place to store nuclear waste might be a problem, especially if we are targeting areas of prime scientific interest. Again, a major space reactor incident shows the dangers of how we can get the safety issues wrong. Historically, reactors during the Cold War used what are called graveyard orbits. They're so high up that it will take them thousands of years to decay, at which point they will not reach the Earth's surface in a way that could hurt people. The problem is that there's so much more in space right now that those graveyard orbits are no longer safe. In 2009, a satellite hit a decommissioned Soviet space reactor. It was the first satellite-on-satellite collision in history, and it created thousands of pieces of space debris that threaten space safety to this day. We must reevaluate the safety of graveyard orbits, how to use them properly, but also look at other alternatives, like controlled reentry, or maybe even reuse in outer space. We have to consider things like waste storage on the surface of the moon or Mars, and develop guidelines so the industry can figure out mission plans. We are on the dawn of a new space age. Nuclear energy can power space exploration and space commercialization in a way that we've never seen before. But as someone working with mission engineers, planners, designers, and government agencies that are developing these new systems, I can tell you that we need more input. We need more law. We need more nuclear lawyers. We need more involvement from innovative regulatory authorities. When I look at this issue, I see an opportunity to reconcile space law and nuclear law and expand the frontier of law itself. Space law can inform nuclear law, things like performance-based regulation. Nuclear law can inform space law. Ultimately, what this means is that when we look at atoms for space, it's really about harnessing the full potential of atoms for Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for excellent presentation. And also, as other speakers, we're going to put you here in the hotspot for a while. And in your presentation, you talk about the legal framework of the nuclear outer space, like in a combined region in context. And also, you talk about the safety, security, safeguards, and liability. You reached a conclusion that you think the current legal framework have some foundations of the proliferation, non-proliferation, and liability already, but lack of the foundation of safety and security. I think we have, like you said, that we also invited speakers in this first ever conference of nuclear law to talk about that as well. We have NASA, we have the UNOSA, and we have the French MIA and some law firms with geographic representative. I think they're also interested to talk about this with you. But come back to you for the question, how do you recommend the international community approaches like such issue by amending the existing treaties to include space, or by developing a whole new set of treaties that deal with application of the nuclear in space?
I feel that we need to develop a whole new branch of law, a new discipline, space nuclear law. I think if you look at the near term for the early missions, we have enough in both nuclear law and space law to do those first activities, especially on the commercial side. But we don't want to be overly restrictive. This is a very innovative environment, one that we can unlock the full potential of nuclear for outer space and also develop technologies that can benefit directly on Earth. So I think when we look at these systems, amending the existing treaties, one, it's premature, but two, I think that you end up having some of the heritages of existing space or nuclear law. I think if you actually start from scratch and develop a new space nuclear law, you can take the best from both worlds. You can find the best parts of aerospace safety, the best parts of nuclear liability, meld them together to create a system that is really, truly revolutionary, and also find new areas of law, things that we don't even know might be problems yet, we could discover by having a whole new branch.
I mean, that sounds ambitious to me, at least. Thank you, Alex, for the great answer and the excellent presentation again.
Thank you.
Alex, Lena, Nataliia, Sean, and Murat. Thank you all for your presentations. I think we have some audience members up there as well. So thank you all for your insights and for your recommendations, and thank you for engaging with the hot topic issues. And we have indeed put you all on the hot spot, and the reason is that we are all on the hot spot at this conference, but also, as Chenchen mentioned earlier, in the capitals to resolve these issues. So now, one more time for the final performance, while we're still thinking about all of these issues, we would invite Marie and Christian on the stage to perform one more, a little musical treat for us, and Marie will share a couple of words with you.
We're very glad to be here. We both actually didn't want to talk today. We talk in our own concerts, and this is a completely different scenario. But I feel like I have to dedicate this last number to my father, who worked here about 33 years ago. I have never met him, and it is very emotional to think about the fact that he might have been sitting here in this very hall. So this goes out to Sheikh Bangura, who also worked for the UN, as far as I know. So the song is called Pen Tango. It's a tango in 5/8. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. This was lovely. This was very Astro Piazzolla-like of you. Beautiful. Thank you. So, and with that lovely performance, we now conclude our event. Thank you all for staying with us through what is now dinner time. I hope the chocolate tied you over a little bit, but thank you all for your attention and for indulging us.
Yeah, and also we encourage you all to continue doing what you are doing with the colleagues around you. And also enjoy the rest of the conference from since Monday till Friday. So here we wish you a great evening and we will see you tomorrow. A great rest of the conference.
And hashtag ICNL 2022. You see those puzzle pieces, those props, use them. And yeah, we'll be retweeting them and sharing them on our wall. So thank you.
Thank you.